The neon sign of Sonny's Cafe in Chicago flickered weakly in the October downpour. Its pale light spilled over the slick sidewalk, where rainwater shimmered like shards of broken glass. Inside, the warm scent of fresh coffee and toasted bread lingered in the air, an inviting contrast to the biting cold outside. That night, the diner was unusually quiet, holding just a few silent figures: a truck driver hunched over his third cup of coffee, an elderly man flipping through a soaked newspaper, and a few students curled up in a corner, buried in their books. Lena Harper, a 28-year-old waitress, wiped down the kitchen counter with slow, deliberate motions. Her legs throbbed after a grueling 12-hour shift. Her life was a dim, uncertain path: low wages, mounting bills, and dreams that had quietly faded. But through the fogged-up window, she saw a disabled boy sitting motionless in a wheelchair, his lost eyes scanning the rain. From a black limousine parked across the street, a pair of sharp, watchful eyes observed in silence. Can a single act of kindness truly change anything? Would you dare to believe that goodness can rewrite fate? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that just might leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly resonate with what I'm sharing here. And leave a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always a joy to see people tuning in from all corners of the world. Lena, the only server left after a long, nearly soul-draining day. A 12-hour shift had left her feeling like two heavy stones were pressing down on her legs, yet her face still carried a smile. Her hands moved swiftly, pouring another cup of coffee, clearing a few plates, wiping away faint stains on the wooden tables. Every movement was firm, practiced, like they'd been programmed by years of quiet patience. Then, as Lena happened to glance up, her eyes stopped at the glass window. Outside, under the streetlight slicing through a thin veil of rain, was a sight that didn't belong to her everyday view. A boy, maybe 12 years old, sat in a wheelchair. His dark brown hair clung to his forehead, soaked. The thin jacket he wore barely shielded his trembling shoulders. His eyes stared into the distance, not at the cafe, but through it, as if he were waiting for someone from a place far, far away. Lena didn't ask anyone. She didn't hesitate. She stepped quickly behind the counter, reached for a dry towel, and pushed the door open. She didn't care if other customers were waiting. She walked straight to the boy. She didn't ask his name, didn't question his story. She simply crouched to his level, gently laid the towel on his shoulders, and helped him inside without saying a single unnecessary word. Inside, Lena placed the boy in the seat closest to the counter. She disappeared into the kitchen, then returned with a plate of hot, toasted bread and a steaming cup of hot chocolate. She placed them in front of the boy, then nodded slightly. The boy looked up, his round, bright eyes a mix of embarrassment and emotion. Lena didn't need a thank you. She didn't need gratitude in his eyes. She stood there for a moment, then quietly returned behind the counter, continuing her work as if nothing unusual had happened. But something unusual had happened, and it was still happening. Across the street, a sleek black limousine sat in silence. The window was lowered just a few inches, enough for the man inside to see everything. James Thornton, the name behind the Thornton Technologies empire, leaned back in his leather seat, eyes fixed on the scene across the street. He wasn't the type to stop his car on a whim. Nor was he someone who noticed the existence of small diners tucked away from the city's main avenues. But tonight was different. He watched the woman. No heavy makeup, no flashy clothes, no eloquent words. Just a simple act. And yet it stopped something in him. In a world ruled by numbers, profit margins, and billion-dollar decisions, Very little still had the power to surprise James, but in just a few minutes, a dry towel, a plate of toast, and a cup of hot chocolate had done exactly that. James didn't know who she was, didn't understand why she'd care so much about a boy she didn't know. But in his eyes at that moment was admiration, raw and unfiltered. Not the kind he felt when writing checks for charity. Not what came with standing ovations after keynote speeches, but admiration for an ordinary woman, doing something kind with no expectation in return. On the damp sidewalk, the chauffeur leaned over and asked quietly, "Shall we go, sir?" James stayed silent. He didn't respond immediately. His hand brushed gently over the face of his watch, as if weighing something carefully. Then he said softly, without turning his head, "Give me a few more minutes." Inside the diner, Lena was asking the truck driver if he wanted more coffee. The boy was no longer shivering. His hands clutched the cup of hot chocolate as if holding on to a rare kind of warmth. No one else inside the cafe knew they had just witnessed something different. But the man in the limousine did. James Thornton didn't take his eyes off the scene. To him, this wasn't a random moment. It was a reminder of something deeper than technology or financial power, a lesson not written in any report, not listed in any quarterly memo. A small act, echoing long after in the memory of a man accustomed to the cold world of decisive transactions. And maybe, just maybe, at that very moment, he began to imagine a different road, one that started with a small cafe, a nameless woman, and a boy in the rain. James Thornton was not someone who was easily moved. For over 2 decades, he had turned a fledgling tech idea into a billion-dollar empire. With signature skyscrapers, global contracts, and thousands of employees who placed their trust in his name, James had long wrapped himself in armor, logic, decisiveness, and a strict absence of sentiment. He didn't let his heart interfere with strategy. He didn't allow compassion to cloud reason. But last night, that changed. When the call came in from his security team, he wasn't angry, as he might usually be. He simply felt a hollow ache he couldn't quite name. Oliver, his son, had wandered off from his therapy center and gone missing for over an hour. The boy had lived with cerebral palsy since birth. His movements were clumsy, his speech difficult to follow, and his gaze, at times, distant and unanchored. The kind of gaze that made the world see him through a different lens. No matter how many specialized teachers, world-class doctors, or attentive drivers James surrounded him with, there was one thing his son still lacked, something James understood all too well: being treated like a regular human being. When James arrived, the glass door of Sonny's cafe was still fogged and streaked with rain. Through it, he saw Oliver, seated at a small table, a dry towel draped over his shoulders, clutching a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Beside him stood a young woman, wiping coffee stains from the tabletop with unhurried hands. She wasn't speaking much. She simply nodded when Oliver looked at her. Not overly gentle, not pitying, just a quiet, natural kind of care, something James almost never witnessed. No one in the cafe recognized the man standing silently at the door in a fine cashmere coat. No one knew he had been watching the whole time, watching as the waitress didn't ask names, didn't probe for background. She didn't need to know who the boy was. She simply helped. The next morning, as Lena tied her hair back and fastened her familiar apron to begin another shift, the image of the boy lingered in her mind. Those eyes, uncertain at first, then lit up by a rare moment of warmth, stayed with her. Not out of curiosity, but because she, too, knew what it felt like to be lost in a vast, indifferent city. A soft engine hum broke the silence outside. Lena glanced out and spotted a black car neatly parked along the curb. A woman in a tailored suit stepped out, her posture straight, movements efficient, the quiet authority of someone used to dealing with powerful people. She pushed open the door and offered a calm, courteous smile. No delay, no small talk. "My name is Sophia," she said gently. "Personal assistant to Mr. James Thornton." Lena blinked, startled. Sophia reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check, an amount large enough to cover Lena's rent for an entire year. Alongside it, an embossed invitation printed in crisp black ink. A request for a personal meeting at Thornton Technologies headquarters. It wasn't a call for repayment, nor did it come with conditions. It was simply a thank you, quiet and deeply respectful. Lena took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Not because of the number on the check, but because she didn't understand how one small act the night before had led to something this significant. Her mind spun with questions. What did they think of her? Was this some kind of elaborate joke? Or was it a wealthy man's idea of charity? But then she remembered the boy's eyes. They hadn't asked for an explanation. They hadn't demanded a reason. They were simply sincere. And the silence she'd sensed from the black car across the street, that silence still echoed. It made it impossible for her to say no. Lena had never been one to dream of fairy tale turning points. She knew her limits. She belonged to a world of 12-hour shifts, coins counted carefully to cover electricity bills, and dinners eaten alone. But today, standing face to face with Sophia, hearing the invitation once more, Lena simply nodded, quietly, but with conviction. She stepped into the car. Not because of the check, not for any promised reward, but because deep inside she knew something was waiting. Something she couldn't yet name, but strong enough to make someone like her, after years of living in silence, dare to step into an unfamiliar world. She had no idea that just hours from now, everything in her life would change forever. The headquarters of Thornton Technologies felt like a flawless machine, cold, efficient, and operating without hesitation. Glass walls reflected the light so intensely it nearly blinded. The marble floors gleamed as if they'd never known the touch of a single human footprint. Employees were polished, every step swift and calculated, as if their movements had been pre-programmed. Lena stood in the middle of it all, silent. Her dark, worn coat clung to her shoulders like a quiet reminder of where she came from. Her faded sneakers seemed to echo with misplaced rhythm against the pristine hallway. No one said a word, but their eyes spoke volumes. She was an outsider, misplaced, like a fish flung ashore, gasping to breathe. Inside a grand office where light poured in from ceiling to floor, James Thornton sat upright behind his walnut desk. He didn't ask Lena about her degrees. He didn't request her resume. He simply looked at her, focused, and spoke with a slow, steady voice. "I need someone with heart, not just skill." Coming from someone like James, those words sounded like a paradox. But in that moment, his eyes, sharp but not cold, made it impossible for Lena to walk away. She didn't know why he chose her, didn't understand what could possibly make a billionaire, the head of a vast empire, entrust her with the role of personal assistant. But one thing she knew for sure, this opportunity wasn't meant for the hesitant. She nodded, a small gesture, but firm. Inside, it was a quiet promise that even if she didn't belong to this world, she would fight to stay in it. But that world did not welcome her. Every day she entered the office, she could feel the unnatural silence. Whispers stopped the moment she stepped in. Glances skimmed over her, measuring, judging. Some didn't bother hiding their disdain. They called her the Waitress, as if that label alone could strip away every ounce of worth she carried. And then came the rumors, buzzing through corridors like static. What had she done to catch James Thornton's eye? Was her presence just temporary? Lena heard it all, felt every scratch it left on her spirit. But she didn't respond, didn't argue. She simply worked, quietly, like she always had. James wasn't easy. He assigned her tasks that would overwhelm any newcomer, analyzing market data, preparing presentations for board meetings, reviewing confidential HR files. Each night, Lena returned to her small rented room, bent over her desk, eyes red from the glare of her screen. She read every report like it was written in a foreign tongue, but she never gave up. She couldn't afford to fail, wouldn't allow herself to be pushed out of the one chance fate had handed her. But that didn't mean the whispers stopped. They fell like droplets of water on stone, persistent, cold, and merciless. One afternoon, after a grueling meeting, Lena walked into the break room. All she wanted was a cup of tea and a few quiet minutes to sit. But as the door creaked open, she caught the familiar voice of a female colleague. "She won't last. Give it a month. She'll be gone. This place isn't for people like her." The words were soft, almost a prediction whispered into certainty. Then came the faint laughs, gentle but sharp as wire. Lena froze. She didn't dare step in, didn't dare turn back. Her hand trembled slightly, her throat dried up. No one knew she was there. No one thought she'd hear. But what hurt most wasn't what they said. It was the silent agreement in the room. No one spoke up. No one objected. She was utterly alone. Lena turned away. The door closed behind her without a sound. But inside her, a heavier door had slammed shut, the door to her confidence. She didn't cry, but something pressed heavily on her chest, weighing down every step. And in that moment, she asked herself, "Am I just fooling myself? Am I really strong enough to stay where every eye wants me gone?" She had no answer, only a rapid heartbeat and a quiet decision simmering beneath the pain. If she had to leave, she would walk out on her own terms, not because she broke beneath their judgment. Dear viewers, take a breath, grab a glass of water, and get ready for what's coming next. The story only gets more unexpected from here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? It's always a joy to see someone joining us from across the globe. Comment 1 if this story speaks to you, so we can keep bringing you more like it. Everything began to crack, not with a loud explosion, but with a quiet, cold, and ruthless blow. Thornton Technologies had just lost a multi-million-dollar contract. No one could understand how their competitor, Nova Innovations, had obtained confidential information that should have existed only within the top-level internal system. Not long after, sensitive documents were found in Nova's possession. Leadership was shaken. An emergency meeting was called. Lena was at her desk, having just finished the quarterly report, when she was summoned to the 3rd floor. No further explanation. Just a few averted glances as she stepped into the elevator, and a chill crawling down her spine she couldn't explain. In the conference room, the air felt thick. Tense faces, heavy stares swept over her as the door closed. James sat at the head of the table, silent, not like his usual self. Marcus Delaney, the chief operating officer, stood. He didn't beat around the bush. Someone saw Lena meeting with Brian Foster, senior staff at Nova Innovations, at Sonny's Cafe, just a few weeks before the leak occurred. The words dropped like a blade. Lena froze, her breath caught. The name Brian Foster meant nothing. Until the image of a man who used to frequent the cafe surfaced in her mind. Tall, friendly, always talking about the Chicago Bulls, always tipping generously. A likable regular, nothing more. She never knew where he worked, never knew his full name. But now, under the weight of those suspicious eyes, everything felt distorted. Marcus coldly slid a folder across the table. "This is Foster's file. Security footage from Sonny's Cafe. Images of you and him chatting. Several times." No one asked Lena for context. No one cared that they had talked about a game score, a new sandwich on the menu, or the early autumn chill. Only the coincidence and the doubt. James remained silent for a moment. Then he turned to Lena. His look was different this time, no longer trusting, but guarded. A pane of glass had fallen between them. His voice, low and cold. "Explain this." 3 words. A simple request. But to Lena, they weighed like chains. She wanted to laugh, but couldn't. Her lips were dry. In that moment, all her efforts, her nights of study, her unwavering stares in the mirror, everything was now dusted over by a layer of suspicion that refused to be brushed off. She looked at James, hoping to find some glimmer of belief in his eyes. But there was none. Only a man trying to remain composed, waiting for a reasonable answer from someone he once trusted, but no longer did. Lena took a deep breath. Her heart pounded. She spoke slowly, clearly. "I don't know who he is. He was just a regular at the cafe. I had never heard of Nova Innovations until today." Her voice didn't shake, but the pain couldn't be hidden. Someone in the room cleared their throat, breaking the silence. But no one spoke up for her. No one took her side. Because the evidence all seemed to support the accusation. To them, she was just an outsider, a waitress who'd stumbled into a rare opportunity, and now, possibly the reason the company was in crisis. James gave a small nod. Not one of understanding, but of finality. "You may leave the room. We'll review everything." Lena stepped outside, hollow. The door closed behind her like a sentence. Her heart heavy, but her feet steady. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just a coldness expanding in her chest, making each breath come harder. People can forgive mistakes, but being doubted because of where you come from, that's what hurts the most. She didn't steal, didn't betray, but no one needed proof to condemn someone they had already decided not to trust. That night, Lena didn't go straight home. She sat in a public library until late, combing through every piece of news, every internal memo, every publicly listed staff directory. Her eyes turned red, but her resolve grew clear. If no one would speak for her, then she would do it herself. She wouldn't wait to be vindicated. She would uncover the truth on her own. Lena didn't cry. She didn't give up. She didn't complain. She quietly began to observe every step, every subtle expression of the people around her, every action, every exchanged glance in the hallway, every seemingly harmless comment in the break room. She remembered them all. She was no longer just the waitress who could be knocked down by prejudice. She was becoming the one who listened, and the one who stayed sharp. At first, nothing was obvious, but then the puzzle pieces began to appear. Lena started to notice Marcus Delaney, the very man who had pointed his finger at her during the emergency meeting. He often disappeared during lunch breaks. He made secretive phone calls at the far end of the hallway. He dodged questions about the Tokyo Partners project, and most telling of all, Lena noticed how quickly he would close his screen whenever someone entered his office. A quiet suspicion formed inside her, not enough to accuse him, but enough to make her heart race every time Marcus walked by. She knew that if this was real, she couldn't wait for someone else to save her. No one believed in her anymore. She had to be the one to bring the truth to light. That night, the office was nearly empty. All the departments had turned out their lights. Lena stood in front of Marcus's dark wooden office door, her palms damp with sweat. She held a folder as a cover, but no one was left to question her. The security guard at the front desk had nodded off. This was her moment. She pulled out a thin wire, bent it into a makeshift lockpick, a skill she'd picked up during hard years in the rough neighborhoods. The lock gave way after a few twists. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed the door open. Inside the room, heavy with the scent of polished wood, Lena moved quickly to the desk. She knelt down, opened the drawer. Nothing suspicious. She turned to the computer. A password screen. She exhaled quietly, then scanned the desk. A family photo, a wife, 2 young children, and a number faintly printed in the corner, his youngest's birthday. She typed, Alex 422. The screen lit up. Her heart seemed to stop for a few seconds, then pounded fast, hard. She clicked through folders, found the email tab, typed Nova Innovations. A string of messages appeared. Cold subject lines, data transfer confirmation, position offer, absolute confidentiality. Lena couldn't believe her eyes. Line by line, it was all there. Marcus had sold internal information to Nova in exchange for an executive position on their board. The attachments, the correspondence, the dates and times, they aligned perfectly with the timeline of the leak. Her hands shaking, she pulled out her phone, captured every screen, documented every piece of evidence. Her eyes blurred. Whether from fear or emotion, she didn't know. But she knew she had crossed a line she could no longer step back from. She shut the computer, pushed the chair back into place. But as she turned toward the door, the hallway lights suddenly flicked on. A shadow stretched across the floor. Marcus stood there, arms crossed, his eyes colder and darker than she'd ever seen. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like steel scraping against steel. Lena tightened her grip on her phone, took a deep breath, and slowly stood up straight. She didn't look away. "And you," she said, calm but firm, "shouldn't betray this company." Each word landed with quiet precision. They stared at each other, the tension drawn tight, like a thread ready to snap. But Marcus did nothing. He couldn't. Lena walked past him, head held high, steps steady. The next morning, Thornton Technologies bustled as usual. Cold white lights, rushed footsteps, focused faces. But inside Lena, a storm was brewing. She walked into James's office. No secretary, no hesitation. She placed the phone on his desk without a word. James looked up, surprised, then unlocked the phone and scrolled through the images. His expression shifted, from confusion to realization to rigid silence. His jaw clenched. His face froze. A long pause. Finally, He looked at her, as if seeing a completely different person. No more suspicion, no more distance. Only one truth remained. I was wrong about you. Just 5 words. But to Lena, they meant everything. The scandal surrounding Marcus Delaney sent shockwaves through Thornton Technologies. No one had imagined that the man who once sat at the center of the boardroom, accusing others with a voice sharp as steel, was, in fact, the traitor from within. Marcus was fired immediately, and the entire team fell into a silent kind of chaos, a collapse that made no sound but left deep cracks running through the heart of the organization. James Thornton, a man who had always prided himself on his ability to read people, began to doubt himself. And amidst it all, he was forced to confront his greatest mistake, doubting the one person most worthy of trust. In a private meeting, James called Lena into his office. There was no desk between them, no cold tone. Just a man, facing a truth he could no longer deny. I was wrong, he said. And coming from James Thornton, those words were not an easy apology. I want you to stay, not as an assistant anymore, but as director of corporate culture. I need you to help make this company better, from the inside out. Lena remained silent, not because she was moved, but because she was thinking. The offer was significant, but after everything, she was no longer someone who trembled before authority. She looked James in the eye, calm and resolute. If I stay, things must change. No more whispers behind people's backs. No more looking down on those just because they didn't walk in through a polished door. James nodded without hesitation. For the first time, he didn't look at her as a subordinate, but as an equal. A human being who had stood firm in the face of suspicion and never lost who she was. A few weeks later, as everything slowly settled into a new rhythm, Lena sat on a bench in Millennium Park. The soft sunlight lit up the face of Oliver, the little boy who once shivered in the rain outside a diner, now excitedly talking about an adventure book. Lena listened, her gaze tender. Every word he spoke seemed to wash away the silent battles she once fought. And she knew every effort had been worth it. For this boy, for herself, and for others. Those without a voice, still waiting for someone to hear them. Lena's story is a reminder that one small, kind, and selfless act can be the beginning of something far greater. What about you? When was the last time you did something simply because your heart told you to? If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for staying with us. And don't forget, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see people joining us from all over the world. Comment 1. If you found this story meaningful, so we can keep bringing you more like it.